Welcome to class, everyone. Go ahead and get your mental notebooks ready because today we're traveling about 2.5 millennia back in time to the ancient India of 500 BCE. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through today's historical masterclass, where we are going to unpack one of the most fascinating and, frankly, most heartbreaking narratives in all of ancient history. We're looking at the life of King Bimbisara of Magadha, his spectacular rise to power, and the chilling betrayal by his own flesh and blood. It's a story where religion and politics were best friends one second and deadly enemies the next, an empire built on brilliant strategy completely fractured by a son's unchecked ambition. So let's jump right in. Here is our syllabus for today's lecture. We'll start with the Rise of Magadha, move on to the Prophecy of Patricide, explore Devadatta's poisonous influence, chronicle the fall of Bimbisara, analyze two views of history, and finally, look at guilt and legacy. Section 1. The Rise of Magadha, Geopolitics and Strategy.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp the tragedy of Bimbisara's fall, we first have to understand the sheer massive scale of his rise. Now, in ancient India, various tribes were settling down and forming large territories, which we know as the 16 Mahajanapadas. Out of those 16, 4 major powers really bubbled up to the top, but one completely left the others in the dust: Magadha. So how did Magadha become this ancient superpower? Well, geographically speaking, they hit the absolute jackpot. They sat on massive reserves of iron ore, meaning they could forge vastly superior weapons and heavy agricultural tools, which created a huge surplus of food. That surplus drove trade, and thanks to an incredible network of rivers, they had seamless, incredibly lucrative trade routes. Add to that the dense forest filled with elephants, which were basically the heavy tanks of the ancient world, and they built an army that was virtually unstoppable. They literally had every advantage. All they needed was a visionary leader.
And that brings us to King Bimbisara. The craziest part about his timeline? He wasn't some seasoned old veteran when he took over. He grabbed the throne of Magadha at just 15 years old. And his rule wasn't just about raw politics. It had this deep spiritual dimension. According to the Buddhist text, the Sutta Nipata, Bimbisara actually met Gautama Buddha before his enlightenment, instantly recognizing his unique virtues. Later on, when the enlightened Buddha arrived at Rajagriha, Bimbisara hosted him and his entire Sangha with immense warmth and respect. It forged this really profound foundational bond between the growing state and this emerging spiritual movement.
But Bimbisara wasn't just a spiritual patron, you guys. He was a geopolitical genius. Instead of just relying on his war elephants to expand the empire, he utilized this brilliant, bloodless diplomacy. He secured his borders through highly strategic marriage alliances. He married the sister of the king of Kosala, Princess Chalana of the powerful Lichavi Republic, and Princess Kema of Madra. Without shedding a single drop of blood on the battlefield, he pacified his neighbors and catapulted Magadha's influence to the very top.
Section 2. The Prophecy of Patricide, Defying Fate.
So he has it all, right? Wealth, peace, immense power. But the king was missing one absolutely crucial thing: an heir to actually inherit this glorious empire. This desperate desire for a son led him to consult an astrologer. And the astrologer looks at the charts and delivers this chilling prophecy. You will definitely have a son, O king, but he will become your greatest enemy. It's a classic case of historical hubris. Bimbisara, high on his own unparalleled success, decides he can just challenge fate. He wanted a future for his empire so badly that he completely ignored this cosmic warning, welcoming the birth of his son, Ajatashatru.
For a while, things seemed totally fine. Bimbisara doted on the boy. But as Ajatashatru grew up, their personalities began to clash in a major way. Bimbisara was pragmatic. He lived a surprisingly simple, unostentatious life. The young prince, though, well, ancient sources tell this amazing anecdote. Young Ajatashatru visits the house of the state's wealthy treasurer with his father, and seeing this grand, opulent mansion, the prince is just disgusted by his own father's modest lifestyle. Right then and there, he vows that when he is king, he will live in a palace so massive it defies imagination. A very real, very dangerous seed of ambition was planted that day.
Section 3. Devadatta's Poisonous Influence, a Deadly Pact. Now, ambition alone doesn't usually make someone murder their own father. You need a catalyst. You need a poisonous whisper in the ear. Enter the primary antagonist of our historical drama, Devadatta. Devadatta was actually the Buddha's own brother. But while the Buddha sought enlightenment, Devadatta was boiling with jealousy, especially over the close bond between the Buddha and King Bimbisara. Devadatta wanted to lead the Sangha, but the Buddha flat out refused him, citing his lack of moral purity. Furious, Devadatta resorted to using Iddhi. In this context, Iddhi refers to worldly, illusory powers, basically dark, psychological manipulation used to hypnotize and control people. And Devadatta aimed these manipulative powers squarely at the young, ambitious prince.
So the crucial point is this horrific pact they make. Devadatta whispers into the prince's ear, "I will destroy the Buddha and take the Sangha, and you destroy Bimbisara and take the kingdom." It's literally the most toxic intersection of religion and politics imaginable. Devadatta convinced the prince that waiting around for his father to die naturally was just for fools.
Section 4. The Fall of Bimbisara. A Slow Demise. Hypnotized by Devadatta's influence and completely blinded by the allure of the throne, Ajatashatru's patience snaps. The bonds of family are entirely broken, and the darkest chapter of our story begins. Now, Devadatta had warned Ajatashatru that directly using a weapon to kill his father would be a grave sin, a total karmic disaster. So the prince devises a terrifyingly methodical and cruel method. He throws his own father, the great architect of Magadha, into a dungeon. He orders that the king be deprived of all food and water. When Queen Mahakasala desperately tries to smuggle food to her dying husband, she is discovered and banned from the prison. To speed up the end and maximize the pain, Ajatashatru sends a barber, not to cut his hair, but to inflict agonizing wounds on the king's feet so they wouldn't heal. All while the prison cell itself is literally being heated from the outside with flames. It was a slow, agonizing demise for a once great ruler.
Section 5. Two Views of History. Analyzing the Texts. All right, class, let's put on our historian hats for a second. When we look at ancient history, we almost never have a single objective camera angle. We rely on texts written by different groups with different agendas. For this event, we have two primary sources. The Buddhist account is completely unforgiving. It paints Ajatashatru as a direct, unrepentant patricide, heavily condemning him because he supported their rival, Devadatta. The Jain account, however, offers a really fascinating twist. It claims that when Ajatashatru's mother reminded him of how much his father loved him, the prince was suddenly struck with profound remorse. According to these texts, he grabbed an axe and rushed to the dungeon to break his father's chains. But Bimbisara, seeing his son charging at him with an axe, thought he was coming to finish the job. To save his son from the ultimate sin of patricide, Bimbisara took poison and committed suicide. Now, we aren't taking sides here. We're just observing how different religions framed the exact same historical tragedy. And this brilliantly illustrates a core tenet of ancient historiography. Ancient historians weren't writing modern, objective Wikipedia articles. History was written to impart moral lessons. It prioritized philosophical and spiritual truths over strictly objective facts. If a story didn't have a moral to teach, they honestly didn't bother writing it down. But both texts absolutely agree on one unshakable truth. Ajatashatru's relentless ambition was the direct cause of his father's tragic end.
Section 6. Guilt and Legacy. The Aftermath. So, the king is dead. The ambitious son finally sits on the throne of that grand palace he dreamed of. But what happens next? What is the psychological cost of paying for your dreams with such dark deeds? Well, the outcome is incredibly poetic. Devadatta, the master conspirator, slowly just fades away into historical obscurity. Ajatashatru, on the other hand, aggressively expands the Magadha Empire, sure, but he's completely hollowed out inside. A profound, crushing psychological guilt eats away at him. He realizes he was manipulated. Seeking peace, he actually goes to the very people his mentor tried to destroy. He confesses and repents to both the Buddha and the Jain Tirthankara, Mahavira. In fact, if you look at the ancient Barhut Stupa, there is a famous stone relief immortalizing King Ajatashatru, bowing in deep reverence to the Buddha. The whole narrative really anchors on this profound historical irony. We start with imprisonment and usurpation. Then comes repentance, born from overwhelming guilt. And finally, in 477 BCE, shortly after the Buddha's passing, who organizes and sponsors the first Buddhist council in Rajagriha? It's Ajatashatru. The man who literally conspired to destroy the foundation of the religion ended up becoming its greatest patron and protector, cementing its place in world history. Which brings us to the end of today's lecture and leaves us with a massive question to ponder. When absolute power is paid for with the blood of a father, can history or the human conscience ever truly forgive? Ajatashatru built an empire and protected a world religion, but that bloody stain on Magadha's rise is permanently etched into history. Think about that as we wrap up today. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey. Keep questioning the past, and I'll see you in the next class.